Hey everybody, I wanted to do a fast video since somebody had asked me how I film things, how I attach my camera gear, what my setup looks like. I will inset now a photo of the setup that you're being filmed on, which has two lights and my GH5 sort of hanging straight down over my desk. And people are curious how I do that. And this sort of plays into the entire reason I built my studio the way I built it and why I spent the money building it out of 80/20 aluminum channel. So we're going to discuss that. I'll put a better photo in here for you, but for me to be able to point at stuff and talk about it, I'm going to use my phone where I took a photo. So what you see here is my GH5, and my GH5 is on a magic arm, and that magic arm is attached to my desk by way of what's called a baby pin, and that pin goes into a receiver plate, and that plate is screwed movably attached to the desk. The desk back is those two slots and that black aluminum in the back, and I'll show you a model of that. So that's called aluminum extrusion. My particular size is 40 series. Usually it comes from a company called 80/20. This stuff comes in all sorts of sizes. Aluminum extrusion is super cool. It's dirt cheap comparatively compared to other building materials of similar strength. And it's basically Lego for big boys, right? So I have here a little model of what an aluminum extrusion looks like. So basically they're not all square, but they usually come in multiples of their basic size. So for instance, this would be basically a 1x1, meaning it's got one slot on one side. And if this was, I don't know how wide this is, but if it was 10 millimeters, then this would be 10x10, right? And then if you took two of those and put them next to each other, right, what you get is something that would be 20 millimeters wide. It'd be a 2x1, right? It's two slots on one dimension, but one slot on the other. And if you looked at it on the end, it would basically kind of have the rough proportions of a 2x4, not perfectly, but close enough. And so you would do it that way. And the back rail of my desk is actually a 2x2, which means it's perfectly square. Again, there are four slots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 8 slots around the outside of the unit. So why do you bother? Why would you do that? Well, one, this stuff is super strong because of the shape. It's completely usually flat and level. It doesn't warp the way wood does, which is amazing. But the real winning feature are these slots right here. And the whole point of that is that you can buy specially formed hardware that makes use of that slot. This, for instance, is an example of, and I'll zoom in on this and I'll show you a bigger photo, but that's something called a T-nut. And what that means is that this little piece of metal, if you look at the shape, is shaped so that it slides into that slot. So it basically slides in from the end. Some of them come in from the end. Others, like this one, are called roll-ins, which means you can, this one's not, but you can basically, they're shaped in such a way that you can drop them in the slot without having to get to the end. But this one comes in from the end. So basically what you do is you drop that in, and then you see you can slide it anywhere along the length of that bar, right? And as long as you do that, then you can screw stuff into it and everything's golden, which means, like, if we take this little nut here, right, I can basically take that nut and I could screw it into this. You can kind of see how that would work, right? This is a little bit fiddly, but I didn't want to break a piece of my desk off to be able to show you this full size. So I screw that in, I slide that in there, and then if I use that nut to bolt something down and I tightened it down, what you have is an attachment point anywhere along that span, and you can always just loosen it up and move it anywhere you need it to go. Pretty cool, super useful. So now this makes more sense, right? So you see that plate can slide around, and that plate is easy to build, and that's one of the things I wanted to do with this. So this particular wall plate, this is meant to be mounted on a wall like this, is a baby pin plate, receiver plate, like I said. And you know baby pins, you just don't always know the name. They're these things that you get with some of your lights and some of your umbrella sets and some of your light holders. They're 5/8 inch wide, I think. And the idea is that these are just really strong. They're dead, stupid, simple. They've been in use forever, and they're super rigid. So basically this piece goes in, you got to back out the screw. That goes in, you see like that collar is almost the perfect size, and it goes in there, and then you tighten this down. And when you do, that gets like incredibly rigid and super strong. In this particular one, the metal of this pin is soft enough that you can see the screw kind of digs in there and keeps it from twisting. The harder versions of these, the better versions of these, have a flat spot so that you line the flat spot up with that screw, and then it can't spin once it's in, right? So it's completely locked in every direction. In any case, what I wanted to do was be able to have this attached to the back of my desk in a way that was movable so that I could put magic arms on it. What is a magic arm, you ask? These are magic arms. You've seen these too. There are good ones, there are cheap ones. This one's kind of in the middle, but you can see right there that it has a baby pin on both sides, which means I can do that and just slide that right in there, tighten this down, and then if this plate was attached to something strongly, then I could use this arm to hang my camera or wherever. For instance, right here in the middle of my desk where you guys are right now. So what I wanted to do was do that without there being a big like hullabaloo. I didn't want to have to custom manufacture anything, and it turns out I do not. So let me open that up and put my magic arm down. So here's the magic. This plate, these two holes turn out to be exactly the width apart as the two tracks, right, boom, boom, of my desk. So if you imagine, obviously the scale's not right, but basically they line up, which means all I need to do is take one of these, which is what's called a drop-in T-nut, which means when it's in this orientation and it's lined up the same way as the slot in the rail, it'll just drop in, it'll fit through the hole. And then when you tighten it, it turns about 45 degrees. And as you can see, well, not to scale, but in that orientation, it will not fit through the slot anymore. So then it's permanently in there until you loosen it and turn it back. Sometimes you have to turn it by hand. It doesn't always turn on its own. It's not mechanical, right? So turns out Amazon has a bunch of these. Amazon also has these, which are appropriately sized, just finger tightening knobs. And I kind of figured out what the depth was so that I wasn't digging into the bottom of the aluminum. So if I take this and I put it through that hole like that, and then you take one of these and you kind of spin it on there, then what you can do is line all four of them up, drop that into the back of an aluminum T-slot, and then when it's in there and you're right where you want to be, when you start tightening, it basically spins until it catches against the edge, and then it tightens down. And then when you loosen it up, at some point you can kind of convince it to sort of rotate back so that you can pull it out of the slot, but you can just slide it back and forth anyway. And then the last piece of the puzzle is, because I didn't want to mar up my aluminum, we have some nice neoprene rubber that I buy in these super convenient self-adhesive squares. So basically put it on there, measure it, razor blade, boom, cut the edges out. But before I do, I mark it off and I go ahead and use a hole punch to punch the holes. Now you don't have to, you can just use a razor blade, but since I do so many of these, I went ahead and bought this super cheap Chinese knockoff hole punch. I don't even know what kind of metal this is. It's pretty horrible and it's not super sharp, but completely reasonable for what we're doing. And basically I just measure it, use the hole punch, boom, punch out the neoprene, stick it on, and we are good to go. So I will go ahead and put a photo in here of the whole setup that you're being filmed on, and hopefully you found that useful. And if you decide to use, even if you don't make your studio out of 80/20, you can get 80/20 sections and attach them to light stands. You could use this to hold the 80/20 section itself on like a C-stand or a light stand, and then use that rail to attach other things. You can get these in 1/4 sized, which means any camera accessory would screw into there. And you can do all sorts of craziness with it. Okay guys, I hope you enjoy, and we'll talk more another time. Take it easy.